Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 16 of the Book 4 Veil Riders series. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Let's go. Chapter 16, Steamed. Despite her best attempts, Nimi ended up angrily sleeping on the couch within the room, wrapped in the comforters of her bed. Without delay, Nimi had suggested that she could sleep in Alavara and Yule's bed, but Alavara was not having any of it. The next day, things continued on as normal with little of note happening, and was considered a relaxed day by Veil Rider standards. The next morning would not be so lucky. Chikily was on pins and needles waiting for his correctly sized broom to arrive, and it arrived the morning of this soon-to-be bristling day of activity. The sparrow harpy was beside himself when it arrived via another messenger, and woke up everyone in Yule's home as he and the messenger harpy screeched excitedly in Harpish. The language could be used as an alarm, it seemed. Yethis, still grumbling over her disaster of a date the day before, was rather loud in her hollering as she ripped open her door.
Chikily!
Yethis screamed.
Shut the damn door and stop with that harpish!
Chikily, however, did not, as both he and the male harpy from Pumperum came running up the staircase.
Yule!
Chikily screamed, zipping by the glowering form of Yethis, her hair a tangled mess due to her fussy sleep.
Yule, broom is here!
Yule cracked open his eyes, blinking blearily at the light filtering into the room past the trees and curtains. Alavara, broom here.
Yay, broom.
Alavara groaned into her pillow, then twitched her fingers, finding them placed in something furry. It sure as hell wasn't Yule furriness either. Alavara cracked open an angry, pregnancy rage-induced blood-red eye and saw that Nimi had crawled into bed beside her and was happily snoring into her shoulder. The ground mattress had been abandoned, and now she had a Cerbnian attached to her.
I'm going to kill you.
Alavara hissed out past her teeth, and Nimi's ember eyes snapped open in instant alarm. Nimi flicked her eyes up, not moving her head, and smiled.
I am of sleeping walk.
I'm going to make you sleep forever.
Alavara started, but was interrupted by Chikily bursting in through the door.
Broom!
Chikily screeched, holding it aloft in his wing claws. The delivery harpy, for whatever reason, threw his own wing claws towards the harpy-sized broom in a grand gesture.
Ba-da-da-da! Broom! Epkit come extra early.
Thank you, Epkit. Yule said tiredly, and was wondering why Alavara was so damn tense beside him. He turned and saw that Alavara had her thumbs hooked into Nimi's cheeks, making the Cerbnian wordlessly howl in pain with squinted eyes. Go downstairs, Epkit. I'm sure there's a maid down there with the money pouch.
Thank Yule and forward for big tip for Epkit.
Epkit called out, clicking rapidly down the hallway with a swing of his mailbag. Chikily was still talking happily in Harpish, hopping around the room on the broom as if he were flying. Yule leaned up, blinking his eyes while reaching over with a hand, tugging softly on Alavara's ear. Honey, stop.
I'm gonna tear your face apart.
Alavara growled, glowering down at Nimi even as Yule tugged on her long elven ear. Nimi, not wanting to upset who she viewed as the main wife of Yule, did not move against the attack. She instead put her balled fists to her face, touching her thumbs to her chin in a Cerbnian gesture for an apology. Speaking was rather hard, since Alavara was still thumb-hooking her cheeks.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Darling, Yule grumbled, instead hooking his arm around the ribs of his pregnant wife and pulling her away from the quietly keening Cerbnian. Let go of the badger thing. Alavara rumbled in her throat like an aggressive animal, eyes wide and bright with anger.
I'm gonna break her stupid little animal face!
Come on, then. Yule said with exhausted patience, standing up and hauling Alavara away from her prey. Yule was wearing pajama pants, a new change in order to keep drama down in his life. Alavara was wearing something similar, but far more large around the waist and with supportive compression weave built in to alleviate swelling in her legs. Nimi, on the other hand, just wore light sleeping gowns to bed, mostly due to Serbians sleeping on top of southern comforters because of their body temperatures. Yule's pants also assisted with keeping Alavara from skinning Nimi, removing the worry about privacy. Yule grunted and picked Alavara up in a bridal carry, then started walking her out of the room while she glared over his shoulder at Nimi. Nimi, get dressed. Chikily, go back downstairs and quit riding that thing. It might activate and shoot you into a wall. Yule muttered, toeing the door open wider with his foot. Chikily went zipping out after him, cackling in harpish as he ran down the hallway, while Yule just carried Alavara to their washroom. She tended to sweat a lot when she slept now, so he figured he would help her clean up.
What is her deal?
Alavara shouted, gesturing with both hands over Yule's shoulders.
First, she destroys her bed, and now she's trying to claim she's sleepwalking?
Yule had been through this one before already, so he just shook his head. Unbelievable.
I know!
Alavara cried out, again gesturing wildly with her hands as her crimson hair shook around her head.
Where does she get off doing that? Cuddling me in the middle of the night. She only does it because it's the safest way for her to get in our bed.
It's absurd, Yule said flatly. He knew she did not want solutions, and also knew that if he offered Annie, she was likely to start biting him or something.
It is absurd. The whole thing is absurd. Are you sure we can't go to war like you wanted to?
Alavara groused, her deep red-hued eyes narrowed.
I want a go-back. What do you humans call it? Uno reverse. I want an Uno reverse card. An Uno reverse spell. I cast Uno reverse.
Yule had to fight to not roll his eyes. You're right.
Whose idea even was this?
Alavara hissed out, folding her arms over her somewhat larger than usual breasts as they wobbled against her swollen belly. Yule found himself in a two-front battle now, the fight to not roll his eyes and the fight to not crack a smile. It had, of course, been her idea to take Nimi as per the agreement, so it was her fault Nimi was even bound to them in this stupid contract. No idea, Yule said airily, softly kicking open the door to the washroom. The maids were already awake as they had a morning crew and an afternoon crew and were just starting to get Alavara's basin of warm water ready. Yule nodded to them, setting Alavara down onto her feet. Good morning, ladies.
Warlord Yule. Rawahi Yule.
They all said at once, bowing forward politely to acknowledge both he and his Rawahi, which was a title for the wife of a warlord. You know what? Forget it. You people never do what I want. Yule puffed out angrily, using his fingers to herd Alavara's hair behind her ears. Get washed up and we'll have breakfast, all right?
Can we eat Nimi?
Alavara grumbled, glaring at the walls as the maids made their way over to undress Alavara.
We can serve her with a side of vegetables and a plate of noodles.
Yule ran his hands down his face, sighing. No, my love, I'm afraid we cannot eat Nimi. The maids let out small, hushed giggles as Yule turned to leave, closing the door behind him. Yule made his way back down the hallway, giving a tired salute to Mackey as she too was making her way to the washroom. Specialist, Yule said. Mackey gave a tired salute back, still in her bedclothes.
My lord.
Yule chuckled at that. Water is still hot in the basin. Alavara should let you wash your face like always.
Cheers.
Mackey murmured, yawning widely while scratching out her stomach. Yule had to get used to Mackey's odd choice of sleeping clothes. She was a boy short and loose tank top kind of gal, and seemed to not give a shit what others thought. Then again, as Yule thought about it, she kinda had the power to not give a shit. She was sleeping in the commander's home and looked over his wife, so she needed some avenues of leeway to remain sane. He always wondered if her tank top ever got stuck on her outward curving horns. The thought of her getting stuck in it did make him smile. What did not make him smile was Nimmy waiting patiently on the couch within Yule and Alavara's room, wearing her new modern Knoll foot-wrap leathers, which were lined with a soft, wool-like fiber harvested from the woolly in Chile, her uniform bottoms, and an extremely cute and colorful long-sleeve top that had a very open collar. Yule stopped in the doorway, staring at her for a long moment while Nimmy stared back, her tail giving a few wary wags. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Yule asked her, walking past the doorway towards his wardrobe. "Cuddling up to Alavara after detonating your bed?" Nimmy idly poked her fingertips together in her lap.
Was a sleepwalking.
Uh-huh. Alavara may claim the same when she finally tosses you out of that window, Yule said, pointing a finger at the larger of the windows in the room. "Go downstairs and wait for breakfast. Try not to upset the woman who has enough hormones to lift a truck." Nimmy stood and bowed to Yule, then made her way out the door. Yule noted that her tail was wagging, and he was sure there was going to be a fight downstairs. He dressed in a uniform, as he usually did, but he had started branching out into different clothes. Alavara had been grousing at him that all she saw him in was green and wanted to see him wear some other colors. This led to Yule doing a smidgen of shopping and was then promptly chastised by both Alavara and Nimmy. He had not done it right, according to the both of them. They instead went shopping for him, and he had a few of the local outfits to wear when it was required of him. He felt a bit like a modern-day royal in the damn things, but it made Alavara happy, so he dealt with it. He knew Alavara would be done soon, so he made his way downstairs and was immediately accosted by Chikily.
Chikily wants to fly!
Chikily cried out, hugging and thwacking his wings against Yule.
Fly high again! Fly in the sky with birds and swoop along the ground!
Yule caught the end of that damn broom to the chin a few times, but managed to keep his composure. "We will, Chikily, but we ought to eat first."
Why not eat outside?
Chikily cried out as Yule turned him by the shoulders and piloted him towards the dinner table, Nimmy raising her eyebrows at them both as the kitchen crew began setting down platters and bowls of food.
Chikily used to eat outside all the time. Kitchen slaves can just pack food for all.
Yule let out a snort. "Chikily, they are not slaves. If they were, they would call me what I fucking want to be called."
Bah!
Chikily puffed as Yule pulled out a chair for him. He took a seat in it and set his broom across his lap. Yule ladled a good measure of burgoo into a bowl for the sparrow harpy, then tossed a few strips of bacon and meat into it as well. He heard the swishing of Nimmy's tail, then looked over at her with a tired glance. She was holding out her bowl to him and smiling brightly. He rolled his eyes, then ladled some burgoo into her bowl as well. Alavara and McKnight came down the stairs, and he filled their bowls since he was already holding the ladle. Alavara was looking a little more refreshed, so he sat next to her and made up some slices of toast and jelly for her as well. McKnight buttered a thick slice of bread, though she did cast her eyes towards Nimmy with a quirk of the lips.
So, this morning going to be a bit more fun and recreation with Chikily? I'll fly broom!
Chikily gleefully shouted, jelly and butter smeared on one side of his face. Despite Yule's best efforts, he still ate like a fingerless caveman.
Chikily can finally go fast! Fun.
McKnight murmured, taking a bite of her bread as she watched Yethis plod down the stairs and land heavily in a chair.
What's up with you?
Yethis glared at her empty bowl, but a small smile broke her lips as Yule leaned over and ladled burgoo into the empty vessel.
Rough night. Things not go well with Chris?
McKnight asked, adding jam to her buttered bread. Yethis made a waggling motion with her hand while pulling an uneasy face, but quickly started to eat her burgoo.
That's all right.
McKnight mused, pouring some morning ale into a mug for herself.
Just regroup and go in for a second attack. No point in calling the mission failed if to one go.
Yule snorted at that, but everyone else rolled their eyes, especially Yethis. After breakfast, Chikily was given a quick run-through of the broom and how to handle it by Alavara and Macknight. To the surprise of no one, Chikily took to the broom like a deer to a meadow and was soon zipping around the sky and cackling like a madman. Yule found it quite curious how the sparrow harpy could fly the broom via his wings and simply held onto the broom with his talons. Flying wasn't exactly the real word for it, as to Yule it looked like the harpy was surfing the broomstick. Will it actually keep working like that? Yule asked Alavara, pointing up at Chikily as he gave a hard bank and started flying upside down. Alavara, watching Chikily with raised eyebrows, gave a soft shrug.
Well, I mean, he's holding it with a pair of hands. Feet hands? He's holding it, whatever he's doing with it. I would assume it's going to work like everyone else.
I wish I could ride it like that.
Macknight said wistfully as Chikily took the broom low to the ground, slaloming his way around a few trucks before pitching up into the air with a gleeful screech.
Looks like that is a lot more fun than holding onto it for dear life.
Alavara chuckled.
You don't have a set of wings to help you guide it along. All Chikily has to do is propel the broom with his feet and his wings take care of the rest.
He's actually doing a thing called surfing, as well as skating, I guess. Yule said, working in the English words with precise movements of his hands to mimic the patterns of the equipment each sport used. He wrapped his arms around Alavara from behind while Nimmy hooked a finger through one of his belt loops. We used to do it on Earth with boards on water, or we attached a board to wheels, which was more or less surfing without water. Macknight rolled the words around in her mouth.
Surfing, eh? Is it fun?
Beats me. I can barely rollerblade. Yule murmured, then leaned down and kissed Alavara on the cheek to keep her smiling. Chikily put on a hard air brake, whipping the broom up in front of him and using his wings to help him hover. He looked out over the treetops at something, then quickly started zooming down towards Yule.
Chikily sees trucks coming!
Chikily called out, ripping around Yule, Alavara, Nimmy, Macknight, and Yethis. He let go of the broom and came to a jogging halt.
Big clouds of steam and big trucks hauling smaller trucks.
Yethis's lips gave a twitch as she looked out towards where Chikily was pointing.
They're here? I thought they weren't due for another day or so. How fast have they been driving? Probably burning through drivers without rest.
Macknight muttered.
If they can steam all the way down here in one go, it makes me wonder what we can do ferrying supplies around.
Yule groaned and rested his head on Alavara's shoulder. I don't want to do more paperwork.
Come on, dear warlord.
Alavara said with a smirk.
You have to greet your new vehicles. The drivers will be expecting it.
Yule waved a hand at Yethis. Can you do a spell that makes two of me or something?
Nope.
Yethis replied with a shake of her head, and Yule let out a sigh. Fine, Yule said, leaning back up and patting his hands on Alavara's shoulders. Fine. Let's go see what the locals have brought us. What the locals brought was the collective elbow grease of an entire engineering hold and multiple cities' worth of engineers. The dwarves, Brim-Touched, and Oni may have only done a fraction of what an earthen factory could do, but it was an insurmountable feat in the eyes of Yule. 50 steam-powered T-214 cargo trucks, boasting insane levels of torque, lined the road, while in between them were the new M26 Dragon Wagons, boasting their own massive steam engines that let out small gusts of feathery fog every now and then. At their head was Big Rover, a gargantuan M939 cargo truck that was large enough to have a small engineering panel near the rear of the cab. Underneath the main cab was an extended living area with wall beds, and the damn thing even had a small kitchen in another rearward area to cook simple meals. It could, for all intents and purposes, run constantly from point to point, the crews trading out drivers in order to rest in the engineers keeping a tight watch on heat, lubrication, and water levels. Yule was staring the hardest at Big Rover as a male Blue Oni engineer prattled off in his ear. There were more of these behemoths on the way, and he could personally feel the golden guilders within his coffers screaming out in horror. The truck was so wide it took up nearly the entire road, and Yule had made sure the roads themselves were wide enough for 2 tanks to drive by on each side. The stones of the road were buckling and crackling under the weight of the massive double wheels, and that didn't even account for the 10 trailers it was hauling, all of which had Clan Thungir DG-93 tank destroyers on them. With 4 wheels to an axle and 5 axles total, he really wondered what would happen in the case of a flat. The wheels themselves were a surprise, and when asked, the Oni engineer went on to explain how the Yamato figured out how to make a lesser rubber. Mixing fresh Windangan manure and the byproducts of fuel production, aka beggar's mud, the concoction could be vulcanized with sulfur, creating a rubber that, while it worked for tires, lacked the staying power of true human rubber. Windangans are some kind of sea heifer. They live in big underwater forests. So what do you think, human? Rather impressive, eh? The Oni engineer said, bumping Yule with his massive blue elbow. Fockett is already arranging over an underground road crews to start work. He said you would understand. Oh, I understand, Yule said lowly as the steam-powered trucks all started turning away towards the motor pool, while the trailers started to rumble and rattle as the brand new DJ-93s were brought online. These things would rip apart any road they went on. The Oni nodded. We had Rover driving in the back until we got closer. It was squishing out the road so badly that the other trucks kept complaining. Are you leaving behind techs to teach my mechanics? Yule asked the Oni, raising a brow as the DJ-93s began to all rumble backwards at once, creaking down the rear exit ramp as a sentry gunner on top of the Rover's cab directed them. The Blue Oni scoffed and waved his hand. Of course, wouldn't do you lot much good if you couldn't fix these things. We kept them all as simple as possible, even the Rover. Reason why it's so big is because we kept all the components sectioned off. If something goes wrong, all you have to do is go into that section and pull the part. Plus, we needed a much bigger and strong frame to support the water tanks. You know that thing is absurd, right? Yule said, pointing a finger at the gargantuan, steam-powered M939. It looks like the massive dump trucks we had working in our mines and such. I'm actually not sure which is bigger, those or this. She's a creature, that's for sure. The Oni said with a laugh as he folded his arms. Can haul more weight than I have ever seen in my life. When we get going, we were making the roads wider just by the displacement. Sure is fun, though. I got to drive old Rover a few times. You just slowly turn that inner wheel, and she just slowly starts to get speed. Once the cargo lanes are set up, we can probably haul a full load at 50 stuffums per hour. 50 SPH? Wouldn't catch me doing more than 30 in that fucking monster, Yule muttered, and the Oni laughed happily beside him. Big Rover turned out to be a bit of a problem. It was so large that there was just nowhere to store it, and it ended up being stored outside base near the horse corrals. Yule had to make use of any and all transportation he could, which still meant there were nearly 300 horses in the many stables in and outside of Valhalla Hill. The broom closet, as it was being called, was next to the motor pool, both areas usually bustling with either mechanics, drivers, infantry, cargo, scouts, or anyone else that was either coming or going. This area of the base was called the Terminal by everyone, even Yule, and was set up much akin to a giant train station. Anyone coming by vehicle was dropped off here first to be seen to by the MPs, who double-checked paperwork or dealt with the civilians. Incoming and outgoing lanes were strictly controlled, and it was not uncommon to see a person on a broom sitting behind a truck, sitting behind a horse-drawn cart, sitting behind an armored vehicle coming back from patrol. Combat harpies were constantly on patrol here, either chasing down runners or tackling broom riders who tried to go around the terminal. To see a rushing mail carrier get dragged back to the terminal by a team of Himalaya harpies happened fairly often, and the few fatalities there were marked on a board. The terminal was becoming quite busy, and as the weeks wore on, it only got busier. Yule was up to his jawline in paperwork, as well as negotiation bills for the trucks now streaming in at a steady pace, and he had to do it alone. Gremlin had gone into labor, and despite the odd timing of it, the healers were saying that baby was more than ready to come out. While Gremlin warred within the birthing wing of the hospital in New Sanrion, Yule had to mull over several documents. The dwarves in Brimtouch were wheeling and dealing him, and while he would get a formidable percentage, the things they wanted would launch them hundreds of years into the future in certain sectors of commerce and civilian life. Proper hardwire telephones, synthesizing fertilizers, plans for furniture, houses, advanced tech they had no hope of even producing yet. But they were just planning for the future at this point. They were getting an early lead and betting on him as their horse in this race, all so they could reap the benefits down the line over time. The military sector was riding high in a mishmash of 70s and 80s tech, all while the civilian sector lagged behind in the medieval period. It appeared they were quite tired of it, and the civilian sector knew it was they who produced all his war materials. They were families of power that wanted to secure their footing in this new world, and there was only one safe way to do it. He would have preferred Gremlin be here, and he had a mind to take the list to her, but he knew that would be poor form. The woman was trying to give birth, and the last thing she needed was Yule bugging her about paperwork. Not that he was going in blind. Gremlin had made up all these papers for him, and her notes were everywhere. Yule murmured to himself, holding up another piece of paper with even more of Gremlin's writing. Well, I'm sure there's nothing wrong with letting them dream of the 40s, I suppose. Yule slipped the paper into the rest of the folders, picked it up, and headed to his Quadra department. This department was both a legal wing and secrecy wing, and he would leave it to them to drop the paperwork. It would pay for the next 20 years in vehicles, and it would just have to do. With that out of the way, Yule went home to deal with his own monsters. It was around 2 in the morning when Yule was awoken up by a runner, and he already knew what it was about. Alavara and he had fallen asleep in the living room, snoozing on one of the couches, while Nimmy happily snored in one of the larger chairs. Yule held up a hand to the runner, keeping him quiet as he slipped off the couch and put on his boots. Alavara and Nimmy were both bickering and fighting every day now, and he wanted this little moment to get away from them. He got in the waiting steam dingo, and the driver took him to the hospital. It was quiet. More so due to Gremlin's troopers keeping everyone away from the damn place, and the warm, wooden-walled hospital was oddly welcoming. Yule got out of the car, waved to a few of the NCOs he knew, then made his way up to Gremlin's room. Not even Chicks or any other human had been alerted yet, as Yule made it so. He wanted to have eyes on this first hybrid of human and Scapiran, and he knew there was still one more to go. He walked up to the door to Aberdale's room, widow of Sergeant Major Mullen, and opened it a crack to peek inside. She was a brim-touched, her horn short, wide, and thick, running from the top of her forehead and just back midway over her skull. Her face was fair, soft, and kind, and her dusky gray hair lay shorter now, splayed out across her pillow. Her yellow, amber eyes turned to look at Yule, and she smiled.
Hey there.
Aberdale said quietly, her swollen belly looking painful as she raised a hand. Yule nodded, stepping inside a few steps. How are you doing since my last visit?
I am holding on.
Aberdale said with a smile, the birthing freckles on her brow catching the light with a sparkle of sweat.
Complications, I believe. I'm way overdue by a far margin now. But still, The child is not ready.
Yule smiled sadly at her. We tread on unknown ground. Your child is likely to be born with horns, unlike gremlins. It may still need more time.
Awful, isn't it?
Aberdale said with a playful pout despite her obvious discomfort.
First to be pregnant, but not the first to birth. Tragic, really.
Yule chuckled softly. Do you need anything?
Water.
Aberdale murmured, laying her hands on her stomach. I'll see to it, Yule said, then slowly backed out the door, closing it shut softly. He found a nurse, sent him off for water, then continued on to Gremlin's room. He heard the soft coos and Gremlin talking quietly within the room as he came before the hall. 10 female MPs stationed outside both the door and the long hallway. They all came quietly to attention, and Yule raised a hand. As you were, he said softly. Let me in. An extremely strapping female Red Oni stepped to the side, and Yule walked through the already open door. He poked his head inside of the small medical room to see Gremlin sitting on her bed, her lover Fino sitting beside her as he slowly wiggled a finger within the grasp of the child. Gremlin was staring down at the baby with wide, electric eyes, as if she had never felt alive at any point until now. Fino was a southern elf, captured long ago by Yule as they both went on their little mini-adventure. Yule had mistaken Fino for a woman all that time ago, and that wasn't changing now either. How do you look prettier than the mother of your child? Yule asked quietly, and both of their eyes snapped up to Yule.
Yule!
Fino said in a loud whisper, getting up and running over to the human in order to embrace him.
It's a boy! I'm a father of a boy!
Yule chuckled and hugged the southern elf, patting him on the back. Congratulations, bud. But you had the easy part.
Damn right he did.
Gremlin hissed at the two men, her dull black hair still frayed out and messy.
You should have seen the things that came out of me. Horrors beyond mortal comprehension!
Fino and Yule grimaced, though the female MPs out in the hall snickered quietly. Yule let go of Fino, then walked towards the bed with Gremlin, his face suddenly going hard as he looked down at the back of the child's head. Show me your child, Gremlin, Yule asked, his face tight and controlled. Gremlin smiled at Yule smugly, then turned her baby around in her arms.
A true monster came from me. Tremble before and behold the mighty Jesper!
Yule let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, and he leaned down to inspect the little creature. It was a normal baby, as far as babies go. He had Gremlin's dark hair and Fino's fine features, which may spell doom or glory for the boy depending on how they matured. The ears, however, were low-angled, the points pointing down towards the shoulders instead of up at the usual angles. Yule found that rather odd. His ears, Yule murmured, tilting his head. Fino nodded, reaching down and tickling at the child's ears.
Yes, they point downwards. We are not sure why they do that, and we are curious if it will be consistently at that angle with other couples.
Healthy? Yule asked. Gremlin nodded.
Had nearly 6 healers, 4 doctors, and 10 temple folk look at him. He is as healthy as could be, and dripping with magical potential, as they put it.
A sharp scream cut through the halls, and Yule jerked up straight in alarm.
Aberdale.
Fino sighed out.
The poor woman. It must finally be time.
They're afraid something is wrong.
Gremlin spoke up as Aberdale's screams came again.
The horns, you know?
Yule grimaced, then turned to look over his shoulder at Gremlin. Congratulations, both of you. Take all the time you need as you recover. I'm going to go see to Aberdale. There's no one else to be there for her. Gremlin and Fino nodded to Yule, and the human rolled his shoulders, walking back out the door as a deluge of nurses, doctors, and healers came running down the hallway. Thanks to Yule, Aberdale had someone there to hold her hand as the pain came. There was plenty of it, and Yule may have been the only one to take the iron grip of Aberdale's hands without making a noise. Yule told her the same calming things he had told his first wife all that time ago, wiping her forehead when the sweat became too much. A rather loud whacking splatter caught Yule off guard as Aberdale gave her last final push, and he leaned up to see what was going on.
Horn covers.
A male healer said briskly, and he moved his hands as if he was peeling something.
The prolonged time of the child within the belly explains these. Her whole head is covered in them, and her horns are jagged. If she came out like a normal brim touched, it would have killed the mother.
Aberdale gave a soft pant as the child let out a single surprised wah, and she tried to lean up, restrained by Yule and a nurse.
A girl? Did you say a girl?
The child popped out into view within the arms of a female satyr nurse, and Yule inhaled a sharp breath. The ears were slightly pointed like a brim touch, and everything else was normal. But two things most certainly were not. The horns, for starters, came out of two central points off of the forehead, but branched out in elegant twists and turns. They were also barbed, as if someone had taken a scissor and made little snips here and there along the main branch of horn. Then there were the eyes, and the eyes worried Yule. They were green, a green so bright they may as well have been emeralds with a flashlight behind them. The color was bright enough to throw a green tinge onto anything the child looked upon, and the child looked around at everything with an eerie calm. To Yule, the child didn't even look like a normal baby, not with that kind of understanding and intelligence. She had a lot more hair than he ever remembered seeing on a baby, and the little girl of Aberdale yawned, as if this whole ordeal had been rather tiresome. Aberdale was given her baby, and the little gray-haired Minsiri held her mother's sweaty cheeks, tilting her head back and forth as if learning Aberdale's face with scrutiny. Yule watched the child do this with a quiet, foreboding awe, then shook his mind clear as he leaned in towards Aberdale. "Congratulations, Aberdale. I'll leave you to the staff," Yule said, then gave the brim-touched woman a pat on the shoulder as he quickly got out of the way of the healers and nurses. Yule walked out of the hospital and let out a sigh of relief, putting his hands in his pockets. "They're a little weird, but they're not monsters. At least, not yet," Yule said to the air, then nearly startled out of his boots when he heard a voice behind him.
They were never going to be monsters, you silly man.
Yule spun around to see a woman standing behind him, though she was no one he had ever seen before. He thought she was an elf with an odd sprawl of freckles across her face, though she had an odd bright red band across her forehead, nearly like a tattoo. Yule stared at her hard, then squinted at the sides of her head. "You have round ears, but you are no human I have seen before."
That is because I'm not human,
she said with a cheerful glint to her voice, clasping her hands behind the back of her brightly colored dress. It was adorned with the many woven forms of flowers along the hems, and she wore it over a vest dotted with many different sizes of red spheres, as if the vest itself had freckles.
And you have heard of me. Cringe Finitri must have let you know my name by now.
Yule narrowed his eyes for a minute, then a single name drifted back to his memory. "My biggest fan." Melanie giggled brightly, bringing her hands around to politely clap them a few times before speaking.
Perhaps, but I dare say you have 3 bigger fans, if my divinations tell me true.
"Why are you here?" Yule asked plainly, turning to look up at the windows of the hospital. "Is something wrong?"
Of course not.
Melanie mused, walking up beside Yule to stare at the same windows.
I'm here to admire the handiwork of a man I despise.
Yule turned to look at her, alarmed. "Despise? We haven't even met before."
Oh, not you, silly man.
Melanie said, reaching over and patting Yule's forearm.
I speak of someone else that you need not trouble with.
Yule, still confused, blinked down at Melanie. "Why isn't Crinja here?"
She's busy.
Melanie said with a shrug.
We can't be everywhere at once after all. And she is far too engrossed in stalking her ancient enemy.
Malmora. Yule said with a groan, running his hand down his face. She's down in New Sanrion? Melanie let out a song of tinkling laughter again.
You should see her. She's wearing a disguise while at a bar.
Yule pursed his lips together, annoyed, but looked back up at the windows. You said you're here to admire?
Indeed.
Melanie said, then held out her hand for Yule to take. Yule looked up in annoyance and opened his elbow, in which Melanie happily threaded her own arm for escorting.
Do you know how rare half-bred children are?
Yule felt her tug him towards a walking path, and he obeyed politely. Apparently not so rare anymore.
Not with you humans, no.
Melanie said with a grin filled with pearly white teeth.
Normally it would take forever, if it ever happened at all. You see, I adore half-bred children. They come from marriages and love so intense that they would gladly scale the mountain together, again and again, just for the chance to make a child that shares their flesh and blood. Half-bred children are a mark of commitment, true love, and I do cherish them so.
Must make you unhappy to see them made so easily, Yule murmured, and he flinched when Melanie actually slapped his arm as she laughed.
Don't be like that.
Melanie chuckled, sighing out happily.
To be honest, it is a bit of a cheat, but I gain most of my divine power through half-bred children. While you humans may be breaking the rules by a fair bit, it does allow me to still benefit. Slacken was quite taken by you humans. He said you were designed to break things and used you to bend the rules.
Yule stopped, turning his head to look at her. Bend the rules? To what?
The rules of change.
Melanie gushed, holding out her free hand to wave it around in the early morning air.
Humans can change the races below. Alter them, remake them, evolve them, and they are still free to love as they wish with whom they wish. With each half-human child, the races are made anew, little by little to mingle with the others.
Yule thought for a minute, trying to remember the particular god's name, then nodded. I believe Righton will have issues with that.
Oh, who cares what that spoil sport thinks?
Melanie said with a dismissive wave of her hand.
He has more skeletons in his closet than what he tries to make others believe. You have no idea the experiments he has running around this world making a mess.
Yule nodded, though with a quick, unsure widening of his eyes. All right.
What I'm really excited for is what happens with Alavara.
Melanie said with a gleeful smile.
What wonder did you two end up crafting together? Not to mention Nimi.
Yule stopped mid-step, looking sideways at Melanie. Nimi?
Of course. She is your second wife, is she not?
Melanie asked, looking up at the human. Yule pressed his lips together, then puffed out a breath of air from his nose. It's, complicated.
No, it's not.
Melanie said matter-of-factly, holding up her hands in particularly peculiar ways to demonstrate.
They don't have anything different down there. You just do the same thing you do to Alavara.
That is not what I mean, Yule said quickly, cutting the goddess off. I mean the relationship. It's complicated. She was part of a trade deal, more or less, and I am not a polygamist. Not to mention Alavara hates the woman. Melanie scoffed, waving her free hand again.
Alavara will come around.
It was Yule's turn to scoff. Come around? She's nearly stabbed a Serbnian twice, and you act as if I'm even for the whole affair.
Growing pains.
Melanie said with a sniff.
She's just adjusting. You three will be a throuple in no time.
That's what you think.
That is what I think, human.
You don't have to live with these two, not to mention Yethis.
Ah, yes. Yethis, do you think—
Are you out of your mind? Yule barked out, wiggling the goddess back and forth by her escorted arm. My house would be nothing more but fur and severed elf ears. Melanie's voice, as she was being pushed and pulled back and forth by Yule's arm, warbled as she held on to Yule's elbow.
But imagine how powerful the babies would be.
Ugh, Yule growled, then started shaking Melanie harder as something dawned on him. Was this all a part of your plan? Melanie let out an oscillated giggle in response, in which Yule just hung his head backwards in anger, squeezing his eyes shut as he found himself in the machinations of yet another living deity. You people are the worst, Yule said, releasing her arm. Gremlin is in room 10, and Aberdale is in room 21. Go and see your bounty then. Melanie hung off of Yule's elbow with her hands, letting out another giggle before standing up on her tiptoes to kiss the human on the cheek.
Keep up the good work,
Melanie said cheekily, then took off at a jog towards the front doors of the hospital. Yule watched her go, then shook his head, sighing out into the early morning. I'm gonna have to see her again when Alavara pops. I need to ask Cringe to kidnap her or distract her. For all I know, she's going to barge into the fucking room with a massive teddy bear or something. And that's the end of Chapter 16 of the Veil Rider Book 4. If you like these stories and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Join us on Discord. Join us wherever the hell we are, everywhere else we're fucking popping around at. Streamed games for the RPG on Tuesdays and Fridays. And that's a weird burp, I apologize, but I'm on a roll. If you really like the stories, want to help support the channel, you can join the coffee, in which I'll read out your name at the end of the videos. For instance, our first shirts, who give $50 per month, really hold the channel onto their shoulders. And a particular shout out to Insane Medic, Death Dancer, Cody Gero, and you know what? eMachino. These guys have given over $1,000, if not $2,000, to the channel over all the months and years I've been doing this, and they deserve a special, fucking lens on them to show, because these guys are really holding the channel up. However, the rest of them are Marquess Theodoric, Savage, the other Killjoy, Calistrad, Aaron Wilbur, Ware Waffengeist, and it's coming, okay, just patience. Ware Waffengeist, eMachino, Cody Gero, Death Dancer, and Insane Medic, who I believe was the first. Actually, yeah, Insane Medic was the first ever first shirt. Then there's the E4 Mafia. These boys give $25 per month in a special lens on Crusader of Florida, the first E4 Mafia member, who's given nearly $1,000 in this particular membership tier. That's Nox Vok, Tab, James Buckner, Sonic Arrow, Darkside, one of my players in the Friday game, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Lacune, Matty Boy, and Crusader of Florida. Then there's our Snuffy Squad boys. These guys give $5 per month. That's Fafnir 13, Toyin, Lone Burrow, Marl Marlsby, Sir Marl Marlsby, Noodle, Alan Solano 9, Split Iris Bear, Mika, Damon Bain Plays, Scott Anderson, Verdis, Damien McEwen, Super Stink 64, Elderock, Croman, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin Schonholtz, Andrew N. Gill, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto Duncan D, and our first ever Stuffy Squad member, Ein, the Loresmith. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Franners, our proofreader, Hailey, Meowsy, Rue Ryder, Simba, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.